Already said, I'm Katie Merrell, and I am a longtime member, as you can tell, real longtime member of the Ethical Humanist Society of Chicago. And I'm here just as me. I'm not speaking for the society, but we welcome the chance. Reverend Scott reached out and said, does someone want to come talk to us about humanism? And I raised my hand, so you're stuck with me. I entitled this One Chicagoan's Understanding of Humanism because it is important to me that you understand I'm using my voice and not speaking for anyone else. So hopefully you get that. And when you're trying to answer a question like what's humanism, the obvious thing you do is on the next slide, you Google it and you pick the Wikipedia definition, and then you're done. You guys don't even need me. So that's it. So according to Wikipedia, humanism is a philosophical and ethical stance that emphasizes the value and agency of human beings, individually and collectively, and generally prefers critical thinking and evidence, parentheses, rationalism and empiricism, over acceptance of dogma or superstition. So we can be done and just go have coffee now. No, I'm going to say more. Wikipedia didn't nail it. But what I am going to do is shown on the next slide. I want to do I have three things. I want to talk a little bit briefly about the history of ethical culture and humanism. And then I'm going to talk about the Ethical Humanist Society of Chicago. And then I'm just going to talk about me as a humanist and what I think that looks like for me as a human being living a life. So the next slide starts us on the history of ethical culture. Sorry, some of it's not very easy to read, apparently. And the lore, and I kind of don't care about the facts. I'm just telling you the story, okay? The lore, Felix Adler was a rabbi's son in New York City in the mid-19th century, being raised up to be a rabbi and take over his father's congregation. And he was sent to Germany to further his education. And while there and studying the great thinkers and reading the big books, kind of decided he wasn't sure he believed in God. So he came back to be a religious leader in a community with having decided he wasn't sure God was like the actual thing to focus on. And as you can imagine, that was controversial in the community. So he started this other thing. And I think that's broad brush true, hopefully. So he started this thing called the Ethical Culture Society in New York. And the focus was, so in 1876, if you care about dates, that's happened in 1876, the focus was directly helping those who need it. And so they had things like a visiting nurse service for the sick without regard to ability to pay. They started free kindergartens. When it did come to Chicago, Jane Addams becomes part of our beginning with the settlement house movement. So it was very much what we think of as ethical action, community service, was sort of the organizing principle. Concurrently-ish, if you round on the decades, in England, something called the South Place Ethical Society / Conway Hall was developed as well, and it was similar. They had a sort of similar thing. So Felix Adler's version of the golden rule was act so as to elicit the best in others and thereby in yourself. So it's not this transactional, I'll be nice to you so you're nice to me. It's more like if I treat you like your best self, even if you're being kind of a jerk, I'm being my best self because I'm speaking to your best self, regardless of what I get from you. So it's a little different. And on the England, the sort of one of the headliney kind of things was a life based on unselfishness, love, and wisdom unite for the purpose of realizing the higher life among ourselves and inducing and enabling others to do the same. So it's different words, but it's the same idea about like trying to be my own best self and finding community among others who want to be their own best selves. We collectively are better selves or something like that. I don't know. I'm a health policy guy. This isn't my real thing. But as on the next slide, if people who are very devoted to understanding the development of something, if you look up humanism and the history of humanism, you'll find articles and stories and things that trace humanism through the basic tenets or people's perception of the basic tenets of humanism through cultures across time. So there's Native American cultures who have very similar words and concepts to some of those core ones. There's in Confucianism, there are similar words, so it goes. Buddhists, the ancient Greeks, Islam, in the Enlightenment in Europe, some of the rhetoric was very akin to this. And some of the writers, I want to say Thomas Paine, but don't quote me, in colonial America had similar kinds of focus and precepts, I'd say. So if you care about the history, it's sort of everywhere. And if you don't, we'll just go to the next slide and look at the history a different way and more organizationally. From a sort of institutional perspective, from an English-centric perspective, I meant English language, not England, the country. The British Humanistic Religious Association was started in London in 1853. And the big headlines about that was that they had male and female members at the same time in the same place. They had elected leadership. So it wasn't this sort of from the top down, pick the guys thing. And they were focusing on the promotion of the sciences, philosophy, and the arts. In the United States, the first humanist society, so remember the ethical culture movement was moving kind of the same time. It was later in England than in the US. In the US, the humanists organizationally showed up earlier in Britain and were later in the US as an institutional presence. In New York City again, that's where everything happens apparently. In 1929 was the first humanist society. And the advisory and board included people some of you may have heard of, Julian Huxley, John Dewey, Albert Einstein, and Thomas Mann. So those were the kind of guys who got together to sort of help create this. And the founder of the first humanist society in New York was this guy, Francis Potter, who advocated stuff like, crazy list, women's rights, access to birth control, and to capital punishment. So the dates change, but the topics don't so much. And since then, from sort of an institutional perspective, there have been three things called Humanist Manifestos, 1933, 1973, and 2003. Apparently you have to do it in a year that ends in 3. The first one was written at the University of Chicago by John Dewey, a bunch of academics from the university, Cornell, Harvard, and some clergy, primarily Unitarians. But Felix Adler, the hero of the ethical culture movement, had died. He was part of that, I think, early conversations and part of that community, but he died before the manifesto was actually let out into the world. So on the next page, I'm just going to give you a flavor of that first one. It's long and very flowery language. And trust me, you're happy I just have the one slide. And I just put some words in red that I'm going to read out. There's a list of, I don't remember how many things. But in the middle of number 11, reasonable and manly attitudes will be fostered by education and supported by custom. And number 12, I put it there because it has the word joy, and that's an important one to me that we include a lot and not just worry about being really smart and thinking hard, but also finding joy. So they did that, and they included the word joy. Religion must work increasingly for joy in living. Religious humanists aim to foster the creative in man and to encourage achievements that add to the satisfactions of life. I think that's a great idea. Let's just add to the satisfactions of life. Like, why not? So that's 1933 language, and the whole manly thing, it was a while ago. But if you go far, fast forward a slide and 70 years, you get to the 2003 one, and I put more, it's much shorter, much less flowery language, and even though it is now a while later, we're in a year with 3. Should we write a new one? It's a chance. This one, it feels more salient still. It feels less manly dated. So I'm just going to call out these few. This is the bulk of it, actually. Knowledge of the world is derived by observation, experimentation, and rational analysis. Again, we can think and understand and learn, and that means we can be wrong and learn more and admit we're wrong and know the new thing. Like, that's the big novel thing there. Humans are an integral part of nature, the result of unguided evolutionary change. Ethical values are derived from human need and interest as tested by experience. Again, it evolves as we learn more and interact with more different kind of people and learn more stuff. Life's fulfillment emerges from individual participation in the service of humane ideals. Humans are social by nature, look at us all, and find meaning in relationships. And working to benefit society maximizes individual happiness. And as economists, I love the idea that we can put it and like use the word maximize and not involve money. So it's a good thing. The next slide is a great summary. It's Kurt Vonnegut, who was a humanist, was Humanist of the Year at one point and spoke a lot about his humanism. And I think he thinks it underlies a lot of his writing. His quote I love, I am a humanist, which means in part that I've tried to behave decently without any expectation of rewards or punishments after I'm dead. So like, that's a really practical take on this, you know? Who knows, but let's just do it as well as we can now. So that's kind of the big picture of humanism and the ethical humanist or the ethical culture movement. I'm now gonna just drill down real fast to us. And so again, the Ethical Humanist Society of Chicago, we were the second ethical society after the first one in New York. We were started in 1882, and we continued, well, I wasn't there, but my predecessors continued Adler's service orientation. So they were active in the Settle House movement, and they had free kindergarten and that same kind of activity. We actually sponsored, I think it was Henry Booth House, or one of the other ones after Hull House. The membership waxed and waned throughout the 20th century. And in the 1990s, as a result of a member bequest, we actually acquired a permanent home in Skokie. So we're right at the intersection of Toohey and the Edens Expressway. If you're ever driving by, come by and give us a wave. It's kind of a funny little building, and we're more later, but we're doing a big renovation. My own opinion is that by acquiring that building, we became sort of a qualitatively different place, because before that, it had been very itinerant. So the people who were drawn to it were very much drawn to the ethical culture movement, and they rented spaces in, you know, like a hotel conference room for a year or whatever they did. And the Sunday school materials were in the trunk of someone's car. And they were very devoted to the ideals of it, and in a way that didn't have to do with place. And as soon as we got that building, my own sense, and it predates me, is that the focus shifted to a community, the congregate community that is in this building. And the Sunday school has rooms and closets where all the stuff stays. You can find it in the same place week after week. Oh, well, that's a lie. There's a place it belongs week after week. Not about that. I think the shift in the community, and again, this is just my own take on it, it became people who were more attracted to, who were more willing to do the work of being stewards of a building. As you guys probably know, it takes a lot of doing, and you end up talking about building stuff. You guys, I don't know if you have an elevator. Man, that elevator is a pain in the neck. It just takes there's a lot of rules about elevators, and as soon as you have one, man, oh man. So the people who are willing to get the elevator inspected and make sure the roof doesn't leak and all that is a little bit different than the people who, where are we meeting next week, right? Like, it's just sort of a different vibe and a different form of connection. So I think we are now somehow qualitatively a little different than we might have been 30 and 40 years ago. And for some, that's an improvement. For some, that's too bad. It's just a true thing. I don't know how to analyze, so I don't have a sign for it, yes or no. So we are currently about 60 members. Because as you guys know, pandemic's been brutal, and getting new members, getting new people in, and all that when we were shut for a year didn't happen. And yet we did lose people, and people moved away and stuff. So we've been shrinking, and we are now affiliated with the American Humanist Association. We are not affiliated with the American Ethical Union. The round you guys sang at the beginning, you'll notice the little copyright. was an American Ethical Union copyright, and I'm sure that was thoughtfully chosen, thank you. And that is very much a part of our history, but we are no longer affiliated with them. But we are part of the AHA. There's a noun. We're an affiliate or a chapter we're a noun of the American Humanist Association. I don't know what the noun is, sorry. The next page is impossible to read, and I don't expect you to, but if you're curious, you can find it on our website. But we bothered a few years ago to make a mission, vision, and values statement to try to force ourselves to think about all those things. And I'm just going to read the middle one, the vision one, which is short. Our vision is to be a strong contributor in a vibrant network of Chicagoland humanist groups and beyond, actively serving our many communities as advocates for human rights, equity, critical thinking, and other humanist ideals. So that's the vision as we wrote it a few years ago. I don't think anybody's moving away from that, so I'll say we'll still own that one. So then the next slide talks a little bit about how does it work. And it works virtually, but with good intention. We have a paid office administrator and a very part-time paid Sunday school director. Everything else, and I mean literally everything else, is done by volunteers via committees. So we have the focal activity, the most conspicuous, I don't know what the right adjective is the Sunday platform. So right now in Skokie, there's a group sitting doing a different thing than this. And historically, we have had that platform has been used to have an expert or thinker of some sort come and talk about something in these realms, primarily science, art, civics, or ethics. So we often have, like we had the curator from, it was actually really interesting. I'm not an art guy. We had a curator from the Art Institute years and years ago who came and talked about when they did one of the pointillists, I don't remember which one, they had a retrospective and they got art from a famous person, I don't remember, and they had pieces from a bunch of different collections, and when they got them all together at the Art Institute exhibit, they realized that the theory about his technique was all wrong, because they finally had these all together and they could see the progress, whatever the thing was. It was really interesting. I don't remember the details clearly, but I remember, like, that's cool. Like, you put all those pictures together and you learn a new thing, right? So having that curator from the Art Institute come and just tell us something like that makes you feel really smart for about an hour. But I admire the expertise in industry of hearing those kinds of things. So sometimes we'll have people talk about, like you can imagine, I'll talk more about that in a minute. We have a Sunday school, it's called the Golden Rule Sunday School. We have something called the Ethical Action Committee, which is community service, and we do a variety of different things. I think probably most of our members volunteer more through their own community groups in different ways than through Ethical Action, but we do work to sort of find volunteer activities together. And as you guys may know from your own experience, it's tough to get things that accept kids, adults, that are attractive to adults. So we have tried with mixed success to include the kids in Ethical Action stuff. We have celebrants, of which I'm one, and I'll talk about more. We have something called the Caring Committee. I feel that it's self-explanatory, but I will explain it. And it's an effort to notice to reach out to people we're not seeing, or people we know are having hard times for whatever reason, and just A, say hey and wave and we notice, and B, is there anything we can do? It's a pretty light touch, and it's pretty idiosyncratic based on what we do know and whether we think that people would welcome it. So it's probably not our superpower, but I think when it works well, it's pretty important for folks. We have obviously all these internal governance and functional boards. The board, personnel, finance, building, publicity, rental. Those are like keep the trains running kind of guys, right? And then a bunch of affinity groups. So there's a book group. There used to be creative writers, but he's not here anymore. The guy who led that with a lot of enthusiasm. So we'll see if that comes back. Film discussion, there was an ethnic dining out that's obviously stopped with COVID. They were just announced we're gonna meet at this such Ethiopian restaurant on Friday at 7, come join us kind of thing. There was a bunch of people who really love doing that. So our motto is if you think it's interesting and other people wanna do it, we'll make the group for it. So that list changes in real time, all the time. So the next slide shows some example speakers. So COVID, obviously, again, I'll talk more about how we've sort of dealt with that, but in the last year or so, this is just 3 semi-random. It wasn't super purposefully chosen. I just picked the last previous speakers. This one was a Ukrainian reporter, understanding Ukraine, 30 years of turmoil. So trying to put much longer perspective on what's going on. This middle person, Heather McGee, and if you haven't read her book, strong recommendation. She's an, I think, Evanston native. One of our members was her beloved middle school teacher. And even though she's really big news, she came and spoke to us. So you guys are 2 degrees of separation from her, so. And then this third guy was the downtown in Chicago, there's the American Writers Museum. Super interesting. He came and explained about the origins of the museum, how they view, how do they keep it current? How do they think about representation of different, what is a writer? What's American? All the things. It was a very interesting and thought-provoking. I have not been, and it's on my list of things that would be fun to try to do. Feel free to go. Tell me about it. So those are the kinds of just different people. Oh, I didn't say what Heather's about. Heather's about racism hurts everybody. It's not just the people who are discriminated against, but that society is worse. The discriminators are also worse off, is basically her premise, and she talks a lot about that. So on the next slide, I kind of just describe what a sort of a typical month before COVID would have looked like. The Sunday platform would have been every week. Sunday school would have been every week during the school year. We have all those internal committees. Ethical action, the Sunday school makes bag lunches for a local shelter every month. And the adults do various things. All these different affinity activities happen. There used to be a Saturday night coffee house with a open mic and then a planned performer. Obviously that hasn't happened for a couple of years, and the woman who ran that, I'm not sure has the bandwidth to rejuvenate it. So don't know what that's going to look like. Before COVID, we're renting to a program that served free hot meals on the weekdays to basically people who needed food and society and socialization. So it was a rental, but it was kind of mission consistent with ours. We rent ad hoc music groups, a play group. Some homeschoolers were renting for a while. They've been gone for a while. But rental is an idea that we're not very good at, but eventually, hopefully, we'll get better at. And then the celebrants, as I mentioned, I'm one of them. We do ad hoc ceremonies as requested, largely for the public, not just for our members. I have yet to do a ceremony for our member. And I do people who want to find a non-religious person to serve as a celebrant, whether a wedding or a memorial or name changing or any of those kind of things. Again, I'll talk about that a little bit more when I talk about me. We're still, on the next slide, we're still sorting out the COVID effects. Like you guys, real time, we pivoted to streaming. Now we have the streaming, now we've kept streaming because there's people who don't want to come back, but there's people who want to be together. So we have this streaming and in-person audience. Because we had to learn how to do remote speakers, we now have retained remote speakers, since that makes the world bigger of potential speakers, right? So some of our speakers are still remote, even if we're in house. We've got all the permutations going. There's a logic box, you can figure that one out. We are undertaking a huge building renovation, and hopefully it will give us new opportunities to build community in new ways, and we'll see how that goes. And we've also recently been working on revising our programming to help reknit the community since we were apart for so long. So we have these EHS community days, that's the little logo. And what we do most months, every other month, instead of a standard thing like this, we do something that is not streamed. And it's totally just to be with the people who come. And it's more personal and just thoughtful. It's not a smart guy saying smart things, it's all of us sharing. And it's just an effort to reconnect and rebuild community. This month, we've made the whole month of January into these. So all month of January is like living like ethics in real life kind of thing. And we're just doing it together. You can't watch any of it online. So that's what I'm missing today, by the way. That's okay. I'm glad to be here. So that's the Ethical Society in about 6 minutes. And now I'm going to move to me because that's the most important thing. And so on the next slide, I talk a little bit about my humanism, which didn't have that word associated with it. But as an adult who found the Ethical Society and brought my kids to the Sunday school and all that stuff, I've reflected a lot on why did this land so hard for me? Why was this such a good fit? And I think it's these three people. My grandmother, who did not love children, and by the time I knew her was kind of old and grumpy. So I don't have fond grandma thoughts about her, but she had this thing that was her mantra, which was, I have to live with myself, you see. And that really landed with me personally. And it's that thing of like, oh, no one will know if I don't do the thing. No one will know if I don't change the toilet paper holder roll right now. No one will know it was me who used the last one. I'll know. I'll feel bad later that I didn't take a second and get the new roll and put it on I'll just know that. It doesn't matter that no one else knows. I want to go ahead and put the new toilet paper on the roll. So it's that, like, we're bearing witness to our own selves all the time, right? And maybe I can trick all of you guys into thinking I'm really nice, but I'll know the thing I did that wasn't nice. And so I think that's very salient, and I hear her grumpy old lady voice in my head. And I'm grateful for it. I think very well of my grandmother, and I have to live with myself, you see, is kind of a thing for me, and I think it's very coincident with my understanding of humanism. My aunt, her daughter, so the apple tree, not far, she was all about yes, and what else is true. And it's sort of the improv yes and kind of thing. I accept what you're saying and I'm moving with it. But it was more of a challenge of like, yeah, I know you feel wronged by the thing that you think just happened, but what does the other guy think just happened, right? Like, what else is true about what you just experienced? And I know you're hurt and you're sad, but maybe there's another way to look at it, or a bigger picture that might make it land a little differently or give you a different perspective on it. So this yes and what else is true challenges you to not get so salty or self-righteous or all the things that I get all the time, and think, what else is true? Like, yeah, I'm really salty about that opinion that guy has, but why might he have that opinion? What else is going on where that might make more sense than what I'm giving credit to? So my lovely aunt, who was much nicer than her mother, gave me this yes and what else is true, which I think, again, is very consistent with my understanding of humanism. And my dad, lovely man, Ned. So here we are. What are we going to do about it? Couldn't have cared less. Why, how, where, what, who knows why? We're here. We need to move forward with whatever is true and just do our very best. He was a very practical man. And my sisters will tell you, keep your fanny down is the most wisdom we ever got from him, because it applies in tennis and sailboats. So along with keep your fanny down, here we are, what are we gonna do about it? And I just appreciate that as very practical. I'm not that bothered about what's gonna happen after I die. I just wanna do the best I can with what's in front of me. And that those three things feel personally like why humanism makes sense to me. I don't know if that made any sense to anybody else. Thanks for listening. But on the next slide, I have words. Words. There's so many words. And I say so many. The first one, it's a bunch of false dichotomies. It just simplifies things. Secular humanism versus religious humanism. Is humanism a religion? I don't care. I love that under Illinois law, we get to be a religion, and it helps us on tax things, and life is administratively simpler by being called a religion. It's not important to me personally. There are people who care terribly about that distinction, and I wish them luck. I happen not to. And I have personally, as I've gotten older and probably a little bit more dogmatic, Claiming it more as a religion from a philosophical perspective to claim the space in what religion is and the role of religion in society. I'm willing to say, yep, this is my religion, and now you have to respect it because we say we respect everyone's religions. And if I take it out of religion, I'm off the field of that discussion. So I've gotten a little bit more like, well, fine, call it a religion, and now I'm going to fight to protect it in the space of we respect different religions. I don't spend a lot of time worrying about that. The new one to me was about 5 or 8 years ago, this idea of Gnostic atheist. I'm an atheist. I think telling people I'm an atheist tends to have really boring conversations. People think I'm mad and I'm against everything. And I'm super not mad, and I'm against not a lot. Well, I am against some things, but not as many things as they would have you think. And so I find humanism a more helpful way to engage the world than saying I'm an atheist. But I am an atheist, and I'm comfortable being an atheist. And a thing I learned a while ago that I thought was interesting was the idea of a Gnostic atheist versus an agnostic atheist. And I grew up hearing about, I'm not an atheist, I'm just agnostic. Like, I don't know, and I don't really care. But the idea that agnostic is an adjective for atheist has this idea of like, I don't think there's a God, I'm an atheist, and I'm agnostic about proving it to anybody. I don't care, I don't need to prove religion's bad or God's bad or any of the things. I just say, I don't think there's a God, but then I'm done with I'm putting the fight down. Gnostic atheists are the guys who care terribly to prove to you there's not a God, and that's the fight, and that's fine. I respect that that's important to them. I don't happen to have that fight in me. And so I think when you think about the people, atheists, some atheists who find our community think we look too religious. And it's like, okay. And they are the Gnostic. They want us to be against religion and to be fighting against anything religious. And most of us don't have that fight, I don't think. But that's kind of, I think, what those two words are about. Congregationalist versus non-congregationalist. We are obviously congregational. We have a little congregation, shrinking. Come join us. But we like seeing each other. We like to know each other. One of my friends is going to have surgery in a week, and I called her last night. How are we all? What are we all doing? What meal train do you need? What do you guys need? And that's important to me. We all value that. A lot of humanists, if you look at the American Humanist Association membership, there's a lot of humanists for whom it's a private activity, that it's an intellectual activity. It's something you can do fine online. And again, I respect that. That's great. I like seeing the people I see on Sunday mornings. So I find that very satisfying. But there's a lot of individuals who are humanists and or atheists who aren't congregationalists. It is ideas, and they are individuals, and that feeds that need for them enough. And so I think for me, it was interesting to think about the difference between congregationalist versus non, in that I think I'm definitely a congregationalist in this not religious construct. So we are a unicorn. And that's fine. Unicorns are pretty. And then othering versus including. And I think about this a lot. And that's kind of why I've landed on really promoting my own self as a humanist versus an atheist, because I think humanist sounds including and atheist is othering, almost definitionally by words. And I'm a hugger, not a fighter kind of guy. And so the words matter to the extent that they get to this othering versus including kind of thing, which is why I think a lot about them. Hopefully that made sense, but those are words. And then this next slide is my humanism and what do I do? And so I have just 2 bullet points here. One, in all aspects of my life, I hold myself accountable to the ideal of bringing the best out in others and in myself. Don't succeed, but I do hold it out as a goal. And that's my grandma. I know when I'm not doing that. Thanks, Irene. And then engage in activities that contribute to the well-being of the earth and its inhabitants. And I have the great good luxury of having time to volunteer several times a week in my community, along with my job is flexible enough to let that happen. And I know that's a luxury to be able to do, but it's an important thing to me to find time to do. So yay, I get to do that. And the other bullet there is at the Ethical Society, I'm a celebrant, and I'm involved in governance. I'm about to be term limited off the board, darn. And I have a lot of friends there. As a celebrant, when I first started, I don't know, 6 years ago, the first time I was driving to a wedding, I was in a West Cook County Forest Preserve building. It was really lovely on a snowy January night. And I got on my way there, and I'd been trained, and I was ready. You know, I'd met with the people. I was all ready. And all of a sudden, I had that total imposter syndrome for about 2 minutes. I was like, who am I to marry these guys? And then all of a sudden, I'm like, who's anybody to marry somebody? Like, it is like, I don't mean it mean. I mean it it is a made up thing. And we respect it because we choose to or not. And I don't know why, and I don't mean this against anybody, but I don't know why a Catholic priest in a big special robe is the guy to do it, and I'm just Katie driving to the thing. It shouldn't. Like, I just had this moment. I'm like, I'm gonna marry these guys, and I like just drove faster, I think. And ever since then, I've just been like, so right now I'm working with somebody on a memorial, and I've never met her, and she is so grateful for me to talk to her about how to think about putting together a memorial for her beloved husband of 40 years. And I'm really glad to talk to her about it and help her think about what that memorial will look like. And in my opinion, my role as a celebrant is to be a mirror to what that family needs. There's no right thing. So I've come to believe for us, the fact of the celebration is the important thing, but the actual constructs of it, I don't really care. I don't care what your wedding looks like. I don't care what your memorial looks like. But if you want to have one, man, am I going to help you have one, the one you want. So the more I can learn about Rick and help her reflect what her care for Rick and what she's learned from loving Rick, if we can put together a ceremony that does that for her, job done. That's what it's all about. So my goal is to be a mirror. I honestly don't care what your wedding looks like at all. And sometimes I'm kind of like, really? You wanted that? But, okay, I'll do it. So for me, I don't know if that made sense. It was kind of just a book, but hopefully it was responsive to a conversation that I had with Scott. And this last slide is Pete Seeger's banjo. And I don't know why it has always spoken to me. And if you can't read it, it says, "This machine surrounds hate and forces it to surrender." And I love the idea that music and us singing together and his banjo can do that. Thank you.
Visit us at uusg.org.